In the shadow of federal banking law especially, it's difficult for cannabis industry businesses to manage their money. So our panel tonight will have 4 experts that can address some of these issues from the banking, insurance, policy, and retail perspectives. I'm going to hand it over to Kyle, who can tell you more about our speakers.
Thank you so much, Matt. If we can have our speakers actually come and sit down, that would be great. So yes, thank you guys all very much for coming. I also wanted to give a special acknowledgement and thank you to Jen and Michelle from LAPCG. They are from their dispensary is the oldest in LAPCG is the oldest dispensary in Los Angeles County. And in advance of 420, which is this weekend, they actually have 50% off coupons to their dispensary that you guys can grab on your way out tonight. So make sure you grab some of those. So I want to introduce our panel. Oh, first of all, I'm Kyle Langan. I do all the marketing and media for Town Hall Los Angeles. Today we have Daniel Yee, who is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications at MedMen. We have Lindsey Horvath, Councilmember from the City of West Hollywood and former mayor. We have Tyler Beuerlein, Executive Vice President of Business Development at Hypur. And Kelly Radkowski, VP and Regional Sales Manager at Cannasure. So together we're going to be discussing the banking issue itself, but its effect on the market and how it might affect business opportunities in the long run. Let me just grab, yeah, there you go. So, Daniel, I want to start with you.
Let's not.
I'm going to spout off a few figures just to start. So, in Q2 of MedMen's fiscal year, which was reported on at the end of February 2019, MedMen increased revenue by 39%, which totaled $29.9 million, $23.7 million of which came from California. Profit margins increased to 53% over 45% in Q1, and among other things, you signed a definitive agreement in December to acquire PharmaCann, which will double MedMen's geographic footprint to 12 states, which accounts for over 50% of the U.S. population. So how is MedMen doing all of this in a country that doesn't allow cannabis retailers to have a bank account?
I wish you had just stopped at 12 states. Well, it is challenging, obviously, and we're going to get into more detail about banking just being one of them. It's it's an evolution. The regulatory landscape keeps changing day to day, and I was talking to someone about this earlier. It's very different from the end of the alcohol prohibition because alcohol, prohibition ended at the federal level. Here you have still federal prohibition, but you have states that are way ahead of the federal government. So it creates this really, sort of twilight zone for a business like ours. Like every business, I think it boils down to capital, and so it's hard to raise capital when you don't have banking service. You cannot get a commercial loan for the most part. The way MedMen was able to do, I really have to give a lot of credit to the 2 co-founders of the company, Andrew Beuerlein and Adam Bierman. This company actually started sometime around 2009, about a decade ago, in Andrew Beuerlein's West Hollywood apartment. It was 5 people trying to figure out how they were going to create a management services company for the cannabis industry. And at the time, their thought process was, like you were saying earlier, you can't cross state lines. You cannot take cannabis from one state to the other. But the one thing that you can do, though, is you can export practices. So if you could actually literally write the book on how to run a cannabis business, that you could capitalize on. So that was their initial idea. Obviously, it's changed a lot over the last 10 years. But with that concept, they were able to get a lot of private capital. They started with some venture capital, but before we went public, May of last year, we raised $135 million through private capital, and that's how they were able to do it. Right. I was talking to a gentleman earlier today because I was at a real estate broker panel, and they were asking, like, if you don't have any access to banking, how did you get buildings? And I said, we literally bought them. I mean, that was our biggest expense in the beginning, was raising money to actually buy real estate, because it was impossible to get, a loan, a mortgage to run a cannabis business. So
wow.
Those were the challenges.
And I mean, you have stores, dispensaries everywhere, not everywhere, all over the place in Los Angeles. And so, harkening back to the topic of tonight, when, you know, at the end of the day, when one of your stores maybe has $5,000, $10,000 in cash at close, where does that money go at the end of the day?
So we have been fortunate. There are, the last time I checked, there are 375 financial institutions, banks, and 111 credit unions around the country that do actually bank the cannabis industry. It's still like 1/30th of the total, so there's not a whole lot of banking service, even like checking accounts. But we were able to, you know, in California we have a half a dozen banks that we work with, and then all across the United States. Because we had that initial capital, we were able to establish banking, you know, services. So at least we're able to pay our vendors, you know, payroll. I remember actually when I joined the company almost 3 years ago, just learning about this business, I was talking to our purchasing manager, and I said, "What are one of your challenges?" They said, "People want to be paid in cash," and I keep telling them, we don't have sacks of cash. I'll write you a check, and they'll say, "But I can't deposit this into I don't have a bank account." So,
wow.
And you know, fast forward 3 years, you know, that's you don't hear about that anymore. So it's becoming easier, but it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination.
MedMen stores have been coined the Apple Store of the cannabis industry because of their sleek design aesthetic, and that definitely brings in a demographic that is different, I think, from where cannabis purchasers were, you know, 5 years ago. What is that demographic that you market to?
Look around the room, everybody here. I got a little story actually. When I joined MedMen 3 years ago, it took me about a year to tell my parents that I worked at a cannabis company. Korean immigrants, I mean, in Korea, there's no difference between cocaine, heroin, marijuana. I guess, you know, under reefer madness, people didn't think there was any difference back then either. But so it took me about a year, and sadly, my dad has Alzheimer's, and about a year ago, 2 years ago now, he all of a sudden decided that he wasn't going to eat at all, and he was losing weight. Like you could see day in, day out, just you know, getting losing weight. And my mom was, you know, at her wit's end, and she went to the doctor. She got a prescription for appetite enhancer, and that didn't work. So I had a little sample of Papa Barkley THC CBD tincture, a little sample bottle that I got in one of the events. That was way back when you could still give samples at events. So I had one. I took it to my parents on a Sunday evening for dinner, and after the dinner, I gave it to my mother, and I said, you know, why don't you try this? It might help. And she looks at it and she goes, what is this? And I said, it's cannabis. And she goes, oh. And I said, well, you know, it's legal now. And this was right after, you know, Prop 64. Actually, right after it was legalized, early 2018. And my mom looks at it and she goes, this is cannabis. And I said, yes, it's legal. She goes, oh, I read it in the news. And then I said, and by the way, I work for a cannabis company. And she goes, oh. She looks at it. So you can get this for free? So that's very typical. Like anybody who knows my mom, it's like she's always looking for a bargain. But the fact that my, you know, 70-some-year-old Korean mother, she can't change her mind about it, I think, you know, I mean, that spoke, you know, tons to me. So now you have, like, my parents live in Buena Park, so you have a lot of senior Korean citizens in Buena Park, Fullerton. As many of you may know, it's like second Koreatown. They're always asking me where MedMen is. And there's one in Santa Ana, pretty close to them. Our own marketing research shows that the modern cannabis consumer is tends older, like in, you know, it's 35 and older. And for women, actually, interestingly, like our target demographic is 55 something. So this is not, and this is just as a, you know, as a gross generalization, obviously. You know, you walk into any one of our stores and you'll see people of all walks of life. So I gave it to my mom on Sunday, and I still remember on Wednesday my mother calls, and anytime she calls me on an evening during the weekday, it's bad news usually. But she calls, she goes, oh my God, this is working. Like he started eating, and he still takes it today. He doesn't know that he's taking cannabis, but my mother knows. And she started trying it, and it helps with her, you know, pain, her arthritic pain, and so that's why all her friends want to know where to get some.
So with that large influx of cash that's being exchanged at your stores, what kind of security measures has MedMen put in place?
So all of our stores across the country actually have 24/7 surveillance. They have cameras, and just like any retail, obviously you have to have high security whether you have cash or not. We did actually have an incident at our Venice store a few months ago where we had armed robbery, and we instruct all of our employees to just don't resist. At the end of the day, it's just money. So we have security guards. They're not armed, but we have security guards, and we have surveillance 24/7. So if anything happens, we just call 911. But yeah, very, very tight security. And also, because it's cannabis and under California law, you still have to show ID to get into the store. So it's usually, the danger is not so much during business hours, but it's sort of the back end if anybody were to break in, thinking that there might be cash in the business.
Got it. I just want to go over the purchasing kind of options at MedMen. So you accept debit cards, cash, credit cards?
No, we don't accept credit cards.
And then, so for recreational use, it's 1 ounce of a flower or plant, 8 grams of a concentrate, so it's an edible, a tincture, a wax. And then medicinally, it's 8 ounces of a flower or concentrate. Are those universal amounts, or is that something that MedMen has regulated?
No, those are under state law, and obviously for a medical cannabis patient, they're going to have a higher consumption. That's why the allowance is there.
And then, I don't know if you guys knew, but CVS and Walgreens have just announced that they are going to be selling CBD products. So how would you forecast that retail market is going to change for MedMen, and how will you compete with that?
So there are 2 parts to that answer. I think on the one part, we look at it as it's validation of the popularity of cannabis today. A lot of the hemp oil-based CBD products that you see, and what CVS and Walgreens will be selling is hemp-based. And hemp oil, hemp seeds have been around for a long time. A lot of people know as a supplement, and they just rebranded CBD because CBD has become so popular now with the legalization of cannabis. And so, people are capitalizing on that, which speaks to sort of the mainstreaming of cannabis in a way, but it's also the CBD that you're getting at CVS, eventually it's not cannabis. Well, it is technically it's cannabis sativa, but it's from the hemp plant. It's not the same thing that you would get at a dispensary, at a licensed dispensary, and the legality of it, and I'm no lawyer, but just having read on it, it's still very gray. The FDA is not for it. The DEA says we've descheduled hemp-based CBD, so it's fine. So federally, it's not illegal, but I think the state of California might have something to say because the state of California says if it's coming from cannabis sativa, if it's coming from a cannabis plant, it needs to be sold through a licensed distributorship. It has to be, so it's a bit of a gray area. But I think again, it's not the same thing that is being sold at licensed cannabis retailers in California, anywhere in the country for that matter, but I think it just speaks to the fact that hemp is so popular. It's just the fact that cannabis is so popular.
Yeah, and then I mean, CVS's are like on every corner. So you don't anticipate any kind of
Rite Aid sells wine in my neighborhood. I've never bought a bottle of wine from Rite Aid.
Touché. Well, I'm going to move over to Lindsey. So Lindsey, like I said, is a council person of West Hollywood. So West Hollywood was one of the first municipalities in LA to issue cannabis licenses. So what does the retail landscape look like today? I know there's cafes popping up.
So we embarked on a very thorough licensing process, and we're still actually going through that. It wasn't until December of last year that we announced our top 8 finalists in each license category. But going back before that, a couple of us on the council, the mayor, and I'm the mayor pro tem now, the 2 of us went and took a trip to Colorado to see what they did there. We then had an education panel before we ever thought about creating our policy. Then we started our policy and initiated a process. This is sort of a long time in the making, but we were very careful, slow, and deliberate to make sure that we did it correctly and to make sure that we're doing the best we can with the law as we know it, with the state law being the basis upon which we built our process. At the time that it was legal to sell, we had 4 existing medical retailers in the city, and we have a long history. As you mentioned, we were very supportive in the fight to legalize cannabis for many, many years, and had some of the first medical dispensaries around. We have the unique distinction as a city of being the only city in America to have property seized by the federal government in a federal raid of a cannabis dispensary. And so we have a very interesting history, but we certainly have been a city that's advocated for legalization. So because of that, and because of the legalization of adult use, we worked with the state to provide temporary licenses to our 4 existing medical retailers. And with the idea being that we were going through this concurrent process, and which just concluded in December, and now the top finalists in each license category are proceeding to go through our planning and business license and all of that. So the retail landscape really is actually medical with temporary licensing, and the stories that you've been hearing about the lounges that are forthcoming, the potential delivery services and things like that are all sort of still in the making.
Yeah.
But when it first started, we had lines around the block, and it was a very exciting time. But that's all sort of calmed down now, and there are businesses just like any other business in the community, and I think what I often like to say is, in our community, over 2/3 of our community supported Prop 64, but that means about 1/3 didn't. And I think the best way to bring the folks along who weren't supportive is by showing that the businesses that do come into your community are just like any other business. There are lots of different types of businesses in every community, and this is just one new kind.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, you just were out campaigning. Congratulations on your reelection.
Thank you.
But had you heard any kind of protestations from citizens who were like, "Oh, this dispensary is right next to my child's preschool"? Like, what kind of threat does that pose?
So West Hollywood is a very unique place, as you might imagine. And I remember I was on the council in 2010 when we were revisiting our medical dispensary licenses. And we actually had parents from a school that was within the radius, the legal radius at the time, of in proximity to a medical dispensary. We had parents come and say, the security guard at this business helps my kid cross the crosswalk in the morning. We really want them to stay here. I said, only in West Hollywood does this happen. But I will say there are folks who are very much concerned. I think the smell of smoke, the smell of the product, these are concerns that have been expressed in the community. And so, I think there are concerns just like the smell of cigarettes and
right.
things like that. So we're taking those concerns into consideration, and we actually thought about, complicated ventilation systems and things like that, and incorporated that in our policy to make sure that the businesses that do come into the city are proactively mindful of some of those concerns we heard from the community.
So the state of Colorado had a total cannabis revenue of $266.5 million in
Yes.
2018. What are the ways, financially and not, that the city of West Hollywood has benefited from the legalization of marijuana?
So it's certainly a benefit for us. We're starting to see, the tax revenue, the sales revenue is helping us, and we just recently passed a sales tax measure at the local level, so we'll start seeing that come into the city as well. I understand that some of the businesses are doing well, so that's good for them. But I think it's yet to be determined now with this new local tax how much we'll be able to benefit. And in fact, when it was on the ballot this past March as well. So as I was knocking on doors asking for votes, people wanted to talk to me about it, and what are you going to spend this money on? And I think what's really great is we were very thoughtful in how we wanted to develop our enforcement policy, and so now we have a source of revenue to actually fund the kind of complex enforcement mechanisms we've put into place, in addition to some other services in the community that we want to make sure are available to our residents.
Yeah. And then I just had a question about, like, what is the dynamic between local and federal leaders? Like, how far are you able to push as a council person on the federal government and be like, well, no, this is so, important for our community to, like, what is that like?
It's probably good if I'm not anywhere near the federal administration at this time. But we don't regularly interact from the local level with the federal level. I do know that there's discussion ongoing at the state level. For example, there were some changes to the law just as recently as January that potentially may impact how we're able to allow the businesses that we hope to license to be able to operate in the city. So we're working with the State Department as well as local legislators that represent us locally to help remedy some of those changes that may potentially impact businesses in our city. But the federal government is always a concern. As I mentioned, they came into our city, seized property, never got that back. Don't expect to get it back from this administration. But I do think that, I think sometimes you find unlikely allies and advocates as people are getting educated about the industry, what the opportunity is that exists. And, one of the things that really motivated me to come on board to legalization is to help get this economy out of the shadows and get people into safer working conditions, to make sure that people are not being taken advantage of or harmed in any way, that product that's being sold in your community is actually safe. And so I think when you help people understand this is going to go on, whether you like it or not, and in California, it was understood to be over $1 billion industry that was never recognized officially. I think it's really important as people get educated that I think we'll start seeing a shifting in people's mindsets. That's my hope. I'm an optimist.
Well, Tyler, I want to move on to you. So I would like you to explain what Hypur is, because I think that you can do better than I, and how exactly you can allow cannabis companies to bank with you.
Yeah, so Hypur is a technology provider for banks and credit unions that they use to bank highly regulated industries. So we were built by bankers for bankers to solve the highly regulated industry problem, which I would say the cannabis industry's banking issues are more in line with highly regulated industries than they are a federal illegality issue. So we've been on the forefront of this for 5+ years. I know that it was cited, and it's widely cited in the media, that there are over 400 institutions openly banking the state legal cannabis industry. Not accurate. In reality, there are less than 35 in the country, but the vast majority of licensees in the U.S. are transparently banked. So when you hear things like crisis and things like that, it's really not what's truly happening on the front lines. Now, when I say 35 institutions banking this industry, I'm talking banks and credit unions that have made a board decision to enter the market. They've developed very robust marijuana-related business programs, and they're actively pursuing growth. So we're a reg tech. There is a transaction side to what we do because merchants in this space do not have access to traditional forms of payment, credit or debit. They're not permissible, and we're seeing a lot of institutions take the approach of, look, we'll bank you, but if we find out you're running those forms of payment, you've had to be fraudulent to an institution somewhere to gain access to those rails, and if we find out, we're going to shut your bank account down because our regulators are breathing down our neck. So our clients are banks and credit unions, but we touch every aspect of the industry.
Yeah. So you guys advertise that you sell marijuana banking software, confidently serving a growing industry. Love a good pun. But
On the marketing side.
Are the majority of your clients cannabis companies?
No, the majority of all of our clients are banks and credit unions, but we're used, I would say, equally to bank all of the other industries that have been shut out of the banking system despite being perfectly legal. So if you look at industries like check cashers, payday lenders, cross-border remittance, gun and ammo retailers, all of those industries have been essentially extremely limited despite those industries being perfectly legal because they're heavy compliance burden for institutions trying to serve them.
So walk me through like the process of, say I'm a consumer and I want to go into a dispensary. You guys have an app, I believe, right, that you can go on your phone. Can you explain that?
We do, yeah. So we have an app, and it's actually, we're making a public announcement on Tuesday. It's launching nationwide for the first time in our history.
Congratulations.
And thank you. We don't, and just so you know, we do not touch money. No third parties involved in these transactions. Our banks originate them on behalf of their own merchants. But from a consumer standpoint, I can download a Hypur app. You can go on the Apple Store or Google Play right now and do that. You set up a quick profile. You click on the logo of the bank you're banking with, just like Venmo. You enter your online login credentials and then choose a 4-digit code. Once you've done that once, you don't need a phone, a card, nothing. You walk into a dispensary. We fully integrated with most of the point of sale systems. And so you can enter your phone number on a number pad, checks you into every terminal, choose your product, bring it to the counter. They choose Hypur as a form of payment. You enter your 4-digit code and you walk out the door. Our banks pull the funds from the consumer's account directly into the merchants at that bank or credit union.
Got it. So it's kind of like Venmo. Like there's a.
It's kind of Venmo, but yeah.
Got it.
There's a massive compliance engine behind it that allows it to happen. Yeah.
Right. So you don't touch cash at all.
We do not.
Got it. And then there's so many regulations imposed on the industry. So what kind of regulations are imposed on Hypur, if any?
We have to go through very heavy security clearances, and we basically get underwritten by every institution that takes us on as their technology provider. So we have to have things like a SOC 1 Type 2. We have to be PCI 3.2 or above. And so that's an onerous process. But really, our banks and credit unions are the ones that are going through the constant review with the regulatory bodies.
Got it. And so your specialty is in business development. And so do you see that this particular aspect of the highly regulated or the cannabis industry, is this like kind of financial technology component becoming like blowing up in the next few years as the cannabis industry grows and grows and grows?
Yeah, we already are.
Intended.
Yeah, so yeah, we're going to hire you for marketing. Fit right in there. No, on the financial institution side, of those 35, north of half of those are our clients at this point. So we've already, we're quickly building on that side, and we've been fortunate to build a reputation, I think, working very closely with regulatory bodies candidly, where if a bank or credit union regulator walks into an institution and they're seeing a level of transparency across the entire life cycle of a merchant that they're not seeing in an institution doing this manually, that bodes well for us. Right, and so that's been a big win. Obviously, the payment products rolling out nationwide is a big win. But I think, especially with things like the Safe Banking Act coming online, this is still going to be a highly regulated industry, and that's just going to open the floodgates for us.
For sure. If you could give advice to someone that wants to break into this industry, whether either the technology component or the cannabis, what would you say?
I would say just get out to shows, meet people, get out to every event you can, learn the industry, and try and figure out where you want to fit in, and then try and build the Rolodex, so to speak, to be able to take advantage of the opportunities when they come.
Cool. So I want to move on to Kelly. So Kelly, again, so you your company is Cannasure, and you provide insurance to cannabis companies.
Yeah, any kind of cannabis-related operation. So we're talking about cultivation facilities, dispensaries, labs and testing facilities, and even down to landlords that rent their buildings out to cannabis-related tenants.
Yeah, so I was perusing your website and doing my research, and there's so many different things that I didn't even expect, which I was talking to you a little bit about earlier, but so dispensaries, if they're vandalized, cultivators, if their crops are damaged in any way, landlords, like you said, ancillary businesses, like, someone who makes bongs, for lack of a better term. But then also to develop kinds of coverage like product liability, workers' comp, and even kidnapping and ransom insurance.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about what you were saying earlier about that?
Yeah, so kidnap and ransom. So it's not something you would think of that I need to purchase this coverage, but to be frank with you, you have a lot of cash on hand. So let's face it. If somebody wanted to come, take that money from you. All they have to do is watch you for maybe a week to see what your regular patterns are, where you go, what time of day you go, and people are pretty regular about doing their regular everyday thing, and someone could come easily and kidnap you or your family members and demand a ransom for it. So there is coverage for that, to be able to not only get the individual back that's been kidnapped, but also to pay that ransom to be able to release the insured.
Can I expand on that real quick? So just to tell you guys a story, we have a credit union client here in California. They're the second institution to really truly enter the market in California. The reason they did is because they had a member of the credit union that would come in 3 days a week for years. And there was a rumor in the community that he was housing cash at his house for a cultivator that was a friend of his. Some very bad people broke in, they shot him and killed him. And that was what propelled that credit union to make the board decision to do what was best for their community and enter and bank the market. They're in Northern California, but it's just kind of going along with this topic.
Yeah.
It's real.
I was going to say, what are the most common threats that you see?
With kidnapping and ransom, or just any claim?
It's just anything.
Sure. So right now what we're seeing a lot of is just your regular basic everyday claims that you would see in any commercial business. So a lot of slip and fall. Maybe some property damage, as far as if there was vandalism, people trying to break into dispensaries and so forth. They haven't been able to do so because the protective measures, even on the windows and doors, are so strong that you're not able to get through. But you're not really seeing a lot of other claims aside from that. A lot of people want to say, oh yeah, I was there and I had this claim. Kind of, like maybe Gentlemen's Club, same sort of situation. They don't want to say they were there. But I think in the future, with all the infused products and also with the cannabis oils that are being sold, you're going to see a lot of product liability issues coming up, where someone might ingest too many of an individual cookie or brownie, whatever it might be. Maybe they're not using the directions and they get ill from that. Or if the product was bad, if it was damaged in some way, or just not at the level the labs say it should be. So you could have a claim with that, and we're foreseeing that over the next 5 years, that's going to be kind of the tip where you're going to see most of the claims coming from.
So are there any regulations that are imposed on Cannasure? Because ostensibly you're taking money from a company that's not federally recognized as being legal.
Sure.
So what is that like?
Yeah, so there are banks or actually credit unions that will accept some cannabis-related money. So it really depends on the financial institution itself. A lot of the state organizations, as far as credit unions, will accept it. And so you have to just find the right one if you are a cannabis operator to find the right bank for you.
Got it. And how do you think, again, trying to forecast, how do you think that insurance will change when CVS and Walgreens starts to sell CBD products?
Sure. So CBD products right now, it really depends on the level of THC that's in the CBD product. So there still is some THC. It has to be under a certain level for it not to be require additional licenses. And if it's under that level, then it shouldn't be an issue. They can sell it anywhere they want to. But true CBD definitely does have a little bit of THC in it, and there are also licenses that are required to be able to sell those products.
And so it's been reported that the price of cannabis insurance is a big deterrent for smaller retailers. So how is Cannasure remedying that? Because I know that you guys kind of pride yourself on being affordable. And yeah.
It's a great question. So really, I think the most important thing to take away here is that the insurance premiums are directly related to the gross annual income of whatever the operation is. So whether you have a cultivation facility or dispensary, whatever the amount of your gross annual revenue is going to directly determine what premium amount you're going to pay for the product. So it's not something where it's going to be $1,000 for the year. It's really dependent on your business and how successful your business is, what that exposure is.
Wow. I want to just kind of pose a question to the panel, and you guys can all answer if you want, and then I'll open it up to questions to the audience. But what do you think it will take for the federal government to legalize cannabis?
2020.
Or what do
I can live with that. When people pose me this question 3 years ago, I would say 5 to 10 years. I think it would be less than that now. Not just because it's we're closer to 2020, but you just see the momentum building. I think pretty much every Democratic presidential candidate has come out in favor, and it's not just I'm in favor of it. They actually have a platform, at some point, it's just silly to have the federal prohibition when, the vast majority of the country has access to some form of legal cannabis. And I think, all you have to do is look at the surveys. I mean, the vast majority of Americans, irrespective of their party affiliation, favors legalization. I think, we're finally seeing the dying days of the reefer madness propaganda, and people are sort of understanding this from a commonsensical, standpoint. Nobody's saying everybody should take cannabis. This is not about, promoting cannabis use necessarily. It's just about giving people the freedom to do it in a safe way, in a safe and reliable way.
Yeah.
One thing we do locally too is a cannabis education forum that's organized by local advocates and activists, and it was actually started by them with the intention of helping to educate the community, including and especially the business community, about the industry, to help dispel a lot of myths and allow a safe place for people to ask questions, because sometimes people are curious, they want to ask things of experts, they don't want to go to HempCon, they don't want to go to, they don't want to walk into a place that they don't want to be seen, but they want to really understand what could potentially be coming to their neighborhood or even be an industry that they want to work in. And so that's one thing that we created in the city annually, and it's been a wild success. We've had a lot of experts come, and I know they're happening in a lot of different places, but ours is free to the public, and we provide it as a community service to help people get familiar with this industry that we're welcoming into the city.
Yeah, I actually think the Republican side of the fence is going to get behind it eventually too. And the really compelling factor of this is money. And if you look at every medical market, and I've sat through all of them at the bank and credit union level, so we see the financials of all of these guys, the monthly revenues, and in every market that's come out and said we're going to be extremely restrictive. They start to get the tax revenue, and then all of a sudden they approve chronic pain, and your demographic is the 19 to 27-year-old male with chronic pain that has a hangnail that goes in to get approved, and you see the revenues for these guys go from $100,000 a month to $1 million a month. Yeah, I've seen it over and over again. I think if you just expand that on the national level, it's just a matter of time. And now that these guys have the lobbying power because they've got the funds behind them, those are compelling things.
I really think with the legalization of industrial hemp that's coming online, you're going to see that sort of as the maybe toe in the pool to check the temperature, see what that's like. We're getting a lot of phone calls from farmers in areas that maybe have grown corn or alfalfa in the past, and they're wanting to change over a part of their crops now to industrial hemp. And it's not just things that you can ingest. I mean, industrial hemp can be used to make paper and clothing, and instead of using fiberglass, they would use that inside of maybe car doors, those types of things. So there's a lot of uses for it. It's a completely sustainable plant, and I think that's kind of the first step to go forward in making it legal federally.
Yeah. So I want to open the forum up to the audience. Sorry. So if you have any questions, raise your hand, and Rachel is going to come around with a microphone and give you the spotlight.
Hi, my name is Johnny Sage with Siva Enterprises. We're a full-service consulting firm, and my question is, if the Safe Banking Act makes its way through, do you think that would have any implications on 280E?
I actually think the Safe Banking Act will have very little effect on anything, and here's why. The way that document is written, and if you watched the hearing, I don't know if you saw that, there was a question posed to the panelists that nobody could answer. And it was a Republican senator, I think it was Senator Posey, and he said, why is this called the Safe Banking Act when it only includes cannabis and not all of the other industries that since the beginning of time have been legal, but they've been shut out of the banking system? And I think that's kind of I think that's the reason why I don't think it's going to get through the Senate. But regardless of that document, if you look at the word solely used throughout the document, a institution cannot solely have a penalty because they're banking cannabis. Well, as a bank or credit union examiner, there are any number of Bank Secrecy Act or anti-money laundering deficiencies that occur if I'm going to go after them for cannabis. So it's really easy for them to find some other thing to attach it to and still go after that institution. The one phrase in that document, though, that will change things is it gives the FFIEC 180 days to come out with guidance to bank the cannabis industry, because right now there is none. So that's the only part of that document that's going to have any effect on the banking system. But in regards to 280E, I don't think it's going to have any effect, and I also don't think it's going to get through the Senate. Good seeing you, by the way.
Oh, great, thank you. This is a question for MedMen. I think you said that you accept debit cards. So does that mean that people coming in with their issuing bank debit card that's backed by, Visa and MasterCard can use those cards?
Sure. Terry might have a more technical answer. I'm just a PR guy. I just spin everything. Yes, we do take debit cards, and to my understanding, it's because they don't use MasterCard and Visa as well. So even if it says Visa and MasterCard, it's coming directly from your checking account. So if I go to a MedMen store and use my debit card, it never touches Visa or MasterCard. It just goes directly, our credit union would directly take money from your checking account and put it into our checking account.
I'm not a banking expert, but I think if you use Visa and MasterCard, they do the processing.
It's
not credit.
The debit networks are separate, but the debit networks are also opposed. So I don't want to put anybody on. It's part of life for these guys in today's world. And if the institution that's banking them is not putting a stipulation on them where they can't run those products and they're not having an issue, I mean, it is what it is for the moment.
So what happens when Visa or MasterCard realize?
They'll shut it down. Yeah, they'll shut it down, or the debit network will shut it down. It's not an ACH. It still travels on a debit network.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
My name is Gerard Wright with LA County BizFed. Curious to, with the conversation of how money is moving with cryptocurrency and also PayPal, all those devices, how does that play into how that money gets moved, if it even can get moved?
Cryptocurrency won't happen. And it won't happen because regulators, all cryptocurrency does, I think blockchain has endless opportunity, and I actually think blockchain will replace core banking systems eventually. Cryptocurrency adds another level of compliance, and regulators that are already having a hard time regulating institutions banking this don't want another layer of it. This is not a payments problem, it's a banking problem, and if you can't solve that, the payment side doesn't matter. So I hope that's... One other thing, PayPal is a stored value money transmitter model. So in a money transmitter, anytime you hear stored funds or you have a card for that, those monies are being pooled into a third-party bank account somewhere. They have to register as a money transmitter. Well, if anyone in that chain of custody does something wrong, it's not a viable long-term situation.
Madam Peterson, my question is it's Daniel, right? Daniel from MedMen. You mentioned towards the beginning of your remarks something about how a problem for some of the people getting into at least the dispensing end of it had a problem with the site, and they needed money to buy a building. Well, what about the real estate aspect of this? I mean, to my understanding, there are people coming along who are saying strictly from a real estate play standpoint, they're going to invest in, say, a facility, say a tilt-up warehouse-type facility that would be perfectly secure so they could rent out space to growers and processors who would process the product, and you could have something similar going on certainly at the dispensary end. I would imagine at your sites, you're renting rather than, you have dispensers renting rather than purchasing. So could you explain that comment you made at the very beginning of your remarks about needing the capital, the cash, to actually buy property?
So this speaks to the fast pace of how this industry is evolving. So 2 years, we joke that we live in dog years, right? 2 years ago versus today, it's a completely different picture. So today there are two REITs, real estate investment trusts, that are actually in the cannabis space, and because they're not plant touching, they can raise funds, they can leverage, they can get bank loans, they can get mortgages. So when we started though, when we wanted to, for example, our Abbott Kinney store, this is before we went public and became MedMen Enterprises, a publicly held company. We had two private equity funds that raised $135 million and a a chunk of that money went into actually buying real estate, because in order for us to put a dispensary that the city of LA licensed for us to open there, doesn't mean first you have to find a piece of real estate that is compliant, obviously, that you can license, right? You have to respect the sensitive uses. Once you find that building, though, you might have a landlord that does not want to rent because of all the inherent risks, does not want to rent 10 years to a cannabis business. So if it's for sale, you can buy it, you can outright buy it, and that's why we raised a lot of capital in the beginning to buy those properties. Just recently, in the last few months, we actually unloaded a lot of those properties to a REIT, because we're not in the real estate business, we're in the cannabis business. So in the beginning, that's what we had to do in order to put the stores where we wanted to put them. But now we've cashed out on a lot of that real estate holdings, and going forward, yes, the idea is to, be tenants and not landlords.
If I can also speak to that, in our process, many cities are exploring what a social equity component looks like, and for us in West Hollywood, rather than categorizing what a particular kind of owner might be like or what background they may come from, what we did, and we're told this was very innovative, so that's why I'm mentioning it, is that we actually didn't require applicants to have their property secured in order for them to go through the process. So real estate can be very expensive in West Hollywood, rent can be very expensive in West Hollywood, so rather than eliminating someone because they couldn't hold a lease or a property for an extended period of time while they would wait and see if they got a license, we allowed them to go through the process without securing their property first. And then, if they're in the top 8 in each category that we created for the licensing, if they were one of the businesses that we selected through our process, they now have a period of about a year to go find a property that is compliant, that will rent to them. Now, in some cases, that meant that some property owners became part owners in the applications that were presented, and partnered with businesses to make sure that they had their property secured. In other cases, that's not happened. But we have also seen that properties in the area, those who are renting even to businesses like Coffee Bean, their rents have gone up and to push people out in hopes that they can bring cannabis businesses in, because there's a lot of money to be had in the industry. So there's a push-pull, and there's all kinds of benefits and challenges with the real estate market with this new industry coming into communities.
Good evening, Katerina Ellaby with Community Partners. First of all, thank you to all the panelists for your time and energy, a lot of insight, and I'm really grateful. I come from the nonprofit sector, and I feel like that's a voice that's sort of missing in this discussion. As far as corporate social responsibility, do you see that on the horizon for the cannabis industry? I feel like at least a percentage of these billions of dollars should be reinvested in the communities that they're making these funds.
As part of our process, I'll say that was something that we made very clear. We wanted our applicants to have a clear connection to the community and intention of how their business would benefit the community beyond dollars and cents to City Hall and the services that we provide to our community. And so it's actually baked into their applications, and it was part of our consideration, and it was given a certain amount of weighting in terms of all the criteria we considered in order to license someone. So these businesses have gone out and made relationships in the community, identified places that they want to be investing. They've also stepped up and in terms of benefits that they are providing to workers potentially, the salaries or wages that they're providing. So we're seeing a lot of that because it was a very competitive process, and we made very clear we want you to be a community partner, to steal your title, in West Hollywood. That was something that people really put into their application, and that was something that we as a council made very clear it was important to us.
Thank you for that question. Actually, that is a very important question. I think it speaks to how this industry is really becoming an industry, right? But right before this job, I worked at Southern California Edison. We had a whole CSR department. To give you a sense of this, when I joined MedMen, there were like 40-some employees. I mean, literally, my first day was a guy giving me a box with a laptop and he said, here, you're ready to go. And then I had to find out the Wi-Fi, password, like, what's our email? So we use Gmail. I mean, that's how 2.5 years ago, that's how we started. And so when people ask us about CSR, yes, I think it is a sign of a mature and responsible, industry to pay attention to that. And to your point, and to equity programs, anybody in this industry cannot forget the fact that for decades, a lot of, mainly black and brown young men have gone to jail for essentially doing the same thing that a lot of people are doing, getting rich today. So that is a huge discussion going on, right? So I own up to it as a person of communication. We haven't done a very good job of communicating where we are at, and it really is, I'm literally, as I'm speaking to you today, I've interviewed 3 people this week, and I'm going to interview 2 more people tomorrow to head our CSR program. We've done it sort of not in a formal way because we're also building this company that went from 45 employees when I joined them to nearly 2,000 today. So the pace of growth is just mind-boggling. So it's challenging enough for us to pay the water bill, to come up with a CSR program. I mean, literally, like sometimes it's like we didn't pay the water bill because somebody forgot to pay the water bill. That's how crazy sometimes it can be. So the CSR program, we did do a number of things. We funded one of the biggest expungement clinics in LA County history. And we helped nearly 600 some people, not just with expungement, but also wraparound services. We did a similar program in Boston. We don't promote this a lot because we're busy promoting other things and we're trying to get people into our stores and all that and building a brand. None of this was done under a formal CSR program, but we are literally building a CSR program. We have a diversity and inclusion program for employees. MedMen pays health benefits to all of its employees, including part-time sales associates. We are the only cannabis company that has a contract with the UFCW union on both coasts. And so we're on it. We just don't have a formal CSR program yet.
And we have just enough time for one more question. I saw a hand raised up here.
Thanks again to all of you for being here tonight. This has been great. I know that in each of your areas, there's a lot of change happening right now. Your comment about REITs got my attention. And I'm wondering, from each of your perspectives, what do you think are the big opportunities in the industry, especially for outside investment or for making a big difference in the reach and the involvement of other industries and success of cannabis?
I can tell you from our standpoint, we've had a unique seat at the table for the last 5+ years, and we've kind of had a viewpoint where we've gotten to see the winners and losers before they had the chance to. And our founder is a former investment banker, so we launched a fund called Hypur Ventures 2, which is a $500 million fund to invest directly into the industry. So I'm bouncing between both of those companies now. But the information gathered over the last 5+ years, we kind of see where everyone's going, how they're trying to get there, and how they're thinking about it. And so we really have seen an opportunity. And so, I think that's a perfect example. If things are moving so quickly, in the next 18 to 36 months are really going to shape the remainder of this, I firmly believe. And if you're not in it, in that time frame, you're too late. I think you're already on the verge of being too late. So that's kind of how it's morphed for us. And I don't know,
I was going to absolutely agree with you as far as it might be on the verge of being too late, because right now there's already some consolidation happening where you have large investors coming in and purchasing up smaller operations that maybe are struggling to keep the doors open to pay their employees and so forth. So you're seeing a lot of larger companies like MedMen as well going ahead and purchasing these smaller companies to be able to consolidate to more of a corporation type of design.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Canopy Growth, but that's the biggest cannabis company in the world. They're Canadian. They just announced it today that they're buying Acreage Holdings, which has John Boehner in its advisory board. So yeah, there's a lot of consolidation going on for sure. And I would actually almost venture to say it might be already too late for true entrepreneurs, like somebody coming in, because it's all tied to licenses, right? So if you were not in LA 5 years ago with the foresight to think that Prop 64 would pass and got a compliant, Prop D compliant, dispensary in LA, it is kind of too late. I have a lot of friends who come to me and say, So how can I get in on it? And I said, well, either find a job, because there's tremendous growth opportunity there. And I mean, I said, don't knock it, because I've gone from being a mid-level, manager at Southern California Edison. If I were lucky, maybe 10 years from then, I would be at a position that I'm in today at my company. And it's also, I mean, as an employee, you at a company like MedMen, going from 45 employees to 2,000 employees, it's a tremendous growth opportunity. You really have an opportunity to leave your mark. It's also crazy. I really feel like I've aged. I know I look like I'm in my 50s, but I'm actually 70 years old. But yeah, there are tremendous opportunities. So when you say opportunity, yes, is it too late for you to come and make millions of dollars because you make the right bet? You're going to need a whole lot of money, like Terry's saying. You're going to need like $500 million maybe to come into this space at the minimum. But there are opportunities. If you have a great product innovation idea, it doesn't have to be necessarily cannabis. It can be something that supports, cannabis businesses.
So my name is Rachael Sanders. I'm a litigator, real estate litigator at the law firm of Allen Matkins, a member of the Young Professionals Committee with Town Hall Los Angeles. So on behalf of the entire committee, I really want to thank the entire audience for coming out here. Thank you so much. And if you can join me in giving this excellent panel a round of applause.
If you guys just want to do some networking for the next 15 minutes or so, that would be great. Thank you guys so much for coming.